Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. A few months ago, Sean the Book Maniac put together a fantastic tag in honor of the podcast Mooks and Gripes, where he asked booktubers to put together a list of books that were on their bucket lists. That is, books that weren't necessarily on their minds to read that particular month, but which they definitely wanted to get to sometime in their lives. I sat down and made an enormous list. And when I tried to figure out how to cull things down, I finally realized that I would just need to make several different iterations of the tag. The first one I filmed, which I'll link to down in the show notes, was restricted to the canonical works written exclusively by dead white men. Actually, they were written by living white men who are now dead. Although, if you have any ghost-written books to add to that list, please let me know. Today, I finally want to put together a broader list, a list with a few women authors, writers from around the world, and even a couple of living folks. Clearly, this list is in no way a comprehensive guide of world literature or anything, just a few of the books I've been thinking about a lot lately. This is only part one of the sequel. There will be a part two coming shortly. I want to apologize in advance for the high possibility that I will mispronounce authors' names. I've tried to find interviews on video or audio where these authors have been introduced or discussed by knowledgeable people, and I've been stunned to see how differently different people pronounce the names. If any of you know of a great aggregator site with authors' names, I would love to hear about it. I need to check this out for every author I talk about, even when I assume I know how that person's name is pronounced. In one of my early videos, someone nicely pointed out that an author I thought was named Smith was actually Smythe. But it's clearly most necessary for me for names that stem from languages I don't know. Let me start by talking about the oldest book on today's list. The Tale of Genji is a classic work of Japanese literature, written by the noblewoman Murasaki Shikabo in the 11th century. This book is often called the first novel, although there's a bit of controversy about that for two different reasons. Some people suggest it was not the first book of its kind, while others argue that it's really not a novel. In some ways, I gather from their argument, it's more like an episodic soap opera, with no overall narrative arc and no real wrap-up at the end. Nevertheless, it was highly influential. And I'm especially committed to reading the works of early authors who were women. And I'm also fascinated by the way that female authors seemed to have made an especially important contribution to the development of the novel, both in works like this, but also in, let's say, 19th century England. My son read sections of The Tale of Genji in a literature class, and while it wasn't his favorite read of the year by any means, he suggested that I might find it fascinating to at least poke through, and he was kind enough to give me his copy. Before we leave Japan, let me also mention Tanizaki. He was a major Japanese writer from the 20th century, shortlisted for the Nobel Prize, if I'm remembering correctly. Interestingly, he wrote a modern Japanese translation of The Tale of Genji. His novel, The Marioka Sisters, has been on my radar for a long time. Published in the 1940s, the novel follows the lives of the wealthy Makioka family of Osaka, focusing on their efforts to find a husband for one of the sisters. In the background, we watch the decline of the family's upper-middle-class suburban lifestyle in the face of World War II and the occupation. Let's move over to another East Asian country with a long literary tradition. For many years, I've had a major work of Chinese literature on my lifetime TBR list, the 18th century novel The Story of the Stone by Zhao Zhiqian. Sometimes the title is given as The Dream of the Red Chamber, or A Dream of Red Mansions, or something similar. I gather that this long work is in some ways like War and Peace, with a huge cast of characters and a storyline that is about a whole society more than just a specific protagonist. I think I want to read the English translation by David Hawkes and John Minton, published in 5 volumes. Hawkes does the first 3 books, and Minton the last 2. To start with, I will only be committing to the first one, which Hawkes entitles The Golden Days. Have any of you read this translation or a different one? I would love to hear some advice. All right, let's turn to the continent of Africa for a moment. I want to talk about 3 books from 3 different sub-Saharan countries. The first is a book that was published in 1911 by the author J.E. Casely Hayford from the area which is now Ghana. His book was called Ethiopia Unbound: Studies in Race Emancipation. Although its title may not sound like it, Ethiopia Unbound is a novel, although it's quite interested in the politics of Pan-African nationalism. Casely Hayford was Fante, I think, from a fairly elite family, and his book was published in English. Ethiopia Unbound centers around philosophical debates between an African man and his English friend, and discusses both contemporary African events and ancient African history with the goal of explaining the context of the African struggle for emancipation. I've not read this book, but I certainly know about some of the influences on it and its influence on other thinkers about various conceptions of Black identity and Black liberation around the globe, especially its link with the idea of double consciousness, which W.E.B. Du Bois talked about so brilliantly. I'm not sure that this book has the kind of literary reputation that some of the other novels on my list might have, but this one is important politically and historically. The next book was published in Kenya in 1967, the year I was born, by the author Ngugi wa Thiong'o, titled A Grain of Wheat. The novel weaves together several stories set during the state of emergency, which was enacted during Kenya's struggle for independence in the 1950s. Basically, the plot revolves around one village's preparations for Kenya's Independence Day celebration, and the community's efforts to get the main character, someone they see as a hero, to speak. He tries to avoid the honor. On Independence Day, former resistance fighters plan to execute the person who betrayed a heroic resistance fighter, also from the village. What the reader knows, but the community does not, is that the main character is, in fact, the traitor. This Nobel Prize-nominated author wrote several other important novels and is also pretty widely known not only for his fiction, but for his essays about African literature and the process of decolonization. And the final African book on my list today is Ugandan author Jennifer Nasibuku Mukumbi's 2014 novel entitled Kintu. The book starts with a prologue about a character who is brutally murdered by a mob in 2004. The novel then moves back to 1750, to the beginning of the curse in the Old Kingdom of Buganda. Blending oral tradition, forms of myth, folk tale, and even biblical references with more historical elements, the novel explores ideas of transgression, to look back at the history of the Buganda kingdom and to trace the birth of modern Uganda. I'm really intrigued by this one, although I guess I actually am for all of the books on this tag list. So let's turn from sub-Saharan Africa to the Middle East for a minute. Top on my list for that area today is the Cairo trilogy by Egyptian author Naguib Mahfouz. Mahfouz is often thought of as one of the forerunners of contemporary Egyptian literature, and even of contemporary literature in Arabic more generally. The Cairo trilogy is probably his best-known work here in the States. Taken as a whole, the set of books follows the life of the family patriarch from the early 20th century until the end of the Second World War. It's a time when Egypt is transforming itself after rebelling against British colonizers. If I'm understanding correctly, the books follow 3 different generations of his family. Someone I watch here on BookTube, I think, talked about how this book considers the complicated passage of time in ways that the reader found almost Proustian. I only own the first of the 3 books in this trilogy. The Palace Walk is set in Cairo right around World War I and ends in 1919, the year of the Egyptian Revolution. My brother gave my family a copy. I think specifically to David, but I may be misremembering, several years ago, and he very much appreciated it. I don't think he has read the rest of the trilogy yet, though. I would also love to read An Unnecessary Woman, written by Lebanese-born author Rabi Alameddine, published in 2014. The novel focuses on the experiences of a 72-year-old woman who's basically a shut-in Beirut. She secretly translates Western literature, like Anna Karenina and Austerlitz, into Arabic, working not from the original language into Arabic, but from French or English translations. In other words, translations from translations. From what I know so far, the book explores how she forms relationships with writers and to some degree characters from this process. I read a review in the Washington Post that said that literature is the character's religion. I'd love to hear from some of you who have read this book. I remember seeing a discussion of it relatively recently on BookTube, but now I'm not remembering where. Okay, let's chat for a minute about a group of books all talking about India in a variety of ways. First is one I can't believe I haven't read yet, Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, published in 1981 and pretty much on my list of books to read someday ever since then. In recent years, it won the Booker of Bookers for the best all-time prize winners. The novel focuses on the transition from British colonial rule to independence and to the partition. One of the reasons it went on my list when I was still in early high school is because of what I heard was its use of magical realism. The reason it was still on that list at the end of college was because of its embrace of post-colonial and postmodern writing. Although I suspect many readers think of magical realism as a kind of postmodernism, which it is in a way, magical realism is also an incredibly common part of folk traditions of storytelling all around the world, including in the American South, where I'm from. My husband David read this book a couple of years ago and loved it. Another book about post-independence India, post-partition, that I really want to read is the massively long A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. The novel has a variety of stories revolving around a young university student and the choice she has to make between 3 suitors, a choice to marry a, quote, suitable boy. The book is absolutely beloved in our corner of BookTube, partly for its stunning setting and well-drawn characters, but also because it looks at political issues from Muslim-Hindu strife to the caste system to the results of national elections. I have a used hardback copy that is really too heavy to curl up with, so when I'm ready to pick this book up, figuratively at least, I might try to get an e-copy, either from my library, assuming they have one, or even purchasing one. Well, next I want to mention A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mistry, a book I found in a little free library recently and talked about in a video just the other day. The response from a very high percentage of the commenters was that the book was not just a 5-star read or one of their favorites for the year, but one of their favorites for their whole lifetimes. This one is very close to the top of my TBR, although I must admit that right now I'm absolutely swamped with books I need to read in order to write commissioned reviews. Still, this one will get read sooner rather than later. Mistry now lives and writes in Canada, but he was born in India, and the book is about India during the, quote, emergency period during the 1980s. And finally, I want to mention a book that I would really like to reread, Jhumpa Lahiri's collection of short stories called The Interpreter of Maladies. I read it when it first came out, at roughly the same time my son was born. While I have images from her prose still stuck in my head, I've fallen in love with the genre of story cycles quite a bit more than I had when I first read her book. I think I might see different things in it now, mostly because what is going on in my head these days is so different from what I was thinking about while holding a newborn. And partly because immigration issues have entered the mainstream dialogue in new ways that I think might help me see new things in The Interpreter of Maladies. Well, there you go. 12 books. 11 I haven't read, plus one I would love to read again. That will do it for today, although I will be back in a soon forthcoming, I hope, part 2 of this more global Mooks and Gripes tag, when I will list another set of books from a sprinkling of other parts of the world. Thank you so much for putting this great tag together, Sean, and also to the podcasters over at Mooks and Gripes. And thanks so much to all of you for joining me today here on Hannah's Books. See you soon.